Euripides' Medea, like Sophocles' Oedipus, has penetrated to parts of modernity most ancient mythical figures cannot reach. Since she first rolled off a printing press 5 centuries ago, she has inspired literally hundreds of performances, plays, paintings, and operas. Medea has murdered her way to a privileged place in the history of the West's imagination and can still command huge audiences in the commercial theater. The avowed intention of James J. Klaus and Sarah L. Johnson, the editors of Medea, Essays on Medea in Myth, Literature, Philosophy, and Art, is to account for her longevity. Johnston's introduction refers this to the multiplicity of Medea's adventures and modes of behavior in the ancient sources. It is through embracing her complexity, we're told, that we will understand the powerful hold Medea has had on our imaginations for nearly 3 millennia. This insistence on complexity and plurality has the advantage of reminding the reader that the terrifying Medea was involved in a variety of surprisingly non-venal activities, at least before Euripides' tragedy. In Pindar and the visual arts, she founded cities, uttered prophecies, and rejuvenated rams, for example. But the editors are fundamentally mistaken in thinking that this narrative complexity explains Medea's attraction in modernity. On the contrary, the reason lies in her simplicity. Medea has survived because her children didn't. She secured her immortality at the premieres of Euripides' tragedy in the spring of 431 BC, when she criticized marriage, argued her husband out of sight, killed her own children in cold blood, and rode off, unpunished, in the dragon-drawn chariot of the sun. Civilization cannot cope with women who threaten the lives of children. Medea transcends history for exactly the same reason that the face of Myra Hindley still sells newspapers. Medea even challenges cultural relativism. Euripides' play is one of the European classics to work superbly in non-European theatrical realization, especially in Nanagawa's kabuki-inspired Tokyo Medea, brought westward in the 1980s. For mother fear is universal. Since humans are all of mothers born, all cultures are nervous about maternal infanticide. Pasolini tried to lessen its impact in his anti-colonial film Medea by implying that child sacrifice was a local custom in Medea's native Colchis. But in using Medea, Maria Callas, to expose the fraudulent universality of his viewers, Europocentric values, he lost some of the primal psychological threat that she poses as universal anti-mother. Medea's manifestations since the Renaissance reveal a ubiquitous preoccupation with the infanticidal drive in her unobliging character, too harsh for our prudish times, as the German Romantic poet Ludwig Tieck deliberately understated it. Christa Wolf has feminist reasons for replacing the murderous sorceress with a gentle alternative therapist and beautician in her novel Medea, Stimmen, 1996. Yet it was not feminism which prompted the English playwright Charles Gildon in the preface to a tragedy based on Euripides' Medea to observe 3 centuries earlier that the infanticide is contrary to all the dictates of humanity and motherhood. This Phaeton 1698. To avoid breaking what Gildon perceived as natural law, he allowed his infanticidal heroine to suffer a fit of exonerating madness. Other strategies have been contrived for protecting our culture's fetishized ideal of the loving mother from its subversion by Medea. Some have replaced the boy's death with a mere flogging. And the Drury Lane Medea of 1731 corrected Euripides' depiction of tragic womanhood by substituting suicide for infanticide. Others have decided that Medea was psychologically influenced by a man in Simon Meier's opera Medea in Corinto, 1813. Taken on international tour by Madame Pasta in the 1920s, Medea is encouraged by a vindictive Aegeus. It says much for the perception of the tragedy's dangerous portrayal of womanhood that the best remembered British Medea of the 19th century, admired by Charles Dickens, was the transvestite actor Frederick Robson. Child killing is not a problematic when the actor playing Medea is male. Robson's tragicomic realization was inspired by the most international Medea of the 19th century, Adelaide Ristori. This redoubtable Italian Marchesa took Ernest Legouve's Medea on tour from Paris to London, Athens, Portugal, New York, and even Brazil and Argentina. But Ristori was careful to let it be known that as a mother, she agreed to play Medea only because in Legouve's version, it is altruistic and maternal love rather than sexually charged vindictiveness, which motivates the killing. Legouve's Medea intervenes to protect her sons from a slow death at the hands of the Corinthians. Ristori's perceived femininity and personal reputation were thus preserved. One reason why Klaus and Johnston misdiagnosed the causes of Medea's longevity is that they have not seriously investigated its symptoms in the very afterlife which they claim to have explained. Reader, be warned, what you see is not what you get. The eye-catching cover illustration, Frederick Sandy's mid-Victorian depiction of Medea as a bilious androgyne, 1868, which itself was the subject of a famous controversy, is never discussed in the essays. Nor indeed is any work of art between pagan antiquity and the late 20th century, except that in the form of a glorified catalogue in the introduction. This might be forgivable if the dust jacket was not so misleading. It lists numerous instantations of Medea's story from Corneille and Delacroix to Diane Rigg, and claims to offer a comprehensive survey of the major representation of Medea in myth, art, and ancient and contemporary literature. This is arguably an offense under the Trade Description Act. The book actually consists of 11 essays on Medea in antiquity, plus only one solitary study of 2 modern Medeas. As so often, the entire cultural history of the post-classical West is relegated to an insignificant ancilla to antiquity. Marianne MacDonald's comparison of Brendan Kennelly's Irish Medea, 1985, with Mikis Theodorakis' operatic version, 1991, is frustrating precisely because its inclusion hints at the stripes Medea has earned in political theatre. Although Medea never found a champion in intellectual history in the manner of Antigone's discovery by Hegel, she has had an important role to play in shaping cultural identity through performance. The archetypal bad mother has been emblematic of civil war and of bad leadership. It would have been good to see a discussion of Andrei Serban's Romanian Medea, which formed part one of an ancient trilogy, a vehicle for critique of the Ceausescu family. Our century, haunted by racial prejudice, has found many resonances in Medea and Jason's articulation of their ethnic differences. Few productions have ever equaled the searing impact made by Hans Henny Jan's radical Medea, which as early as 1926 daringly confronted the audience at the Staatstheater in Berlin with an aging black African heroine. Klaus and Johnston would have been wise to ask a social historian to investigate the historical evidence for maternal infanticide and attitudes to it in antiquity. Nor is there any sign of the psychoanalytical reading virtually demanded by Medea's expression of the dichotomous love-hate relationship between mother and child, and the splitting of womanhood between the bad, persecutory Medea and the good, persecuted daughter of Creon. The best essays are those on myth read structurally and anthropologically as an analogue of ritual. Fritz Graf adds Medea to the increasingly long list of legendary persons now thought to have been involved with initiation rites, and Johnson's own essay, interesting, connects Medea with reproductive demons believed to attack pregnant women and babies. The article on literature are disappointing, with the exception of Deborah Bodeker's fresh and unassuming demonstration that Euripides' Medea assimilates features of both her victims and her victimizers, an approach drawing on the René Girard's idea of mimetic desire, although Bodeker does not say so. The meager philosophy section includes an exciting essay, Martha Nussbaum's subjective examination of the erotic aspects of Seneca's Medea, but this already notorious interpretations published before in her book, The Therapy of Desire, reviewed in the TLS June 24, 1994. The embarrassing chasm between ancient and extremely recent Medeas, evidenced in Klaus and Johnston's collections, partially bridged by Ruth Morse's honest and genial study, The Medieval Medea. It is unpretentious and sensible, just occasionally lapsing into off-putting theoretical meta-language in the discussion of Medea in medieval allegory, for example. The eclectic methodology encompasses historicism, mild structuralism, feminism, and frequent excursus into narratology. Morse's unsurprising argument is that medieval treatments of the story of Medea serve medieval concerns by focusing either on the traveling Jason as forerunner to the Trojan War, or on Medea's retaliation as a threat to the male order. Morse writes engagingly on the hugely influential Romain de Troyes of Benoît de Saint-Maur, one of the several secular stories of the 12th century written for the Anglo-Roman court of the Angevin kings of England, to uphold the values and ideals of an increasingly worldly order interested in tracing its own origins. She shows how Benoit avoided attributing moral blame to either Jason or Medea. His purpose rather was to explain how the Argonautic expedition foreshadowed and precipitated the much more important expedition of the Greeks against Troy. Her study of Christine de Pisan's Livre de la Cité des Dames argues that this female author tries to evade the more violent aspects of Medea's revenge and portrays Medea's vices as stemming from an excess of virtue. These are some interesting remarks on the central role of Ovid's Heroide in shaping the history of epistolary literature, and pleasant illustrations from illuminated manuscripts make for an intellectually unchallenging but well-mannered book. Yet in her opening chapter on ancient Medeas, Morse comes unstuck. She tries to play down the shocking impact of the Euripidean infanticide by proposing that Medea is indeed fully punished by her grief at the loss of her children. Unfortunately, the text of this anomic play does not bear out such an ethically correct reading. Euripides knew how to portray a bereaved mother's grief heartbreakingly, Hecuba, Andromache, and could have done so in Medea if he had chosen. Medea's unrelenting frightfulness seems to terrorize Ruth Morse, along with so many before, into diluting and softening her impact. Similarly, in James Klaus and Sarah Johnston's volume, only Christian Survinu-Inwood's study of Greek iconography comes close to grappling with Euripidean tragedy's visceral gender politics, whose crystallization of the power struggle between women and men still contains explosive socio-political potential. This was well understood by the suffragettes in Edwardian London, who recited passages from Medea at their meetings, and by the Frankfurt Christian Democrats, who tried to censor a production involving vulnerable male nudity and castration in 1976. Not for nothing did Tony Harrison subtitle his 1985 Medea, still unperformed, a sex war opera. In France, they seem to understand Medea a little better. The journal Pallas is to publish the papers, including some on reception, delivered to a conference on Medea held at Toulouse in March 1996. Its title book promising, Médée et la violence.